I wrote back to you. I'm all embarrassed, but that's nothing new. Yeah, so guys, Deb and I were talking about the fact that I am behind on logging your e-exam scores, but I know I keep saying I'm going to get it done, and I haven't. I'm going to get it done though. I really am. But in the meantime, I hope that you're finding the working through this stuff is going okay, as well as finding that if there are some either missing e-exam items, or you wanted to go back in and fix up something, that you've had the time to do that. So yes, I it's like on my mind and I haven't done it, so I apologize. Meanwhile, though, before we launch into practice, are there any outstanding questions, problems, confusions that we need to get to? I'm kind of thinking that given what I'm seeing about what you're submitting to Grade Grinder, things are going well. That said, don't forget, let me know if you have questions, problems, confusions. I want to help. And I also understand that Lindsay's I mean, I know she's very good, but I also understand from your feedback that you're getting a lot of help from her. So that's fantastic. Okay. We're good to go. Should we launch into some proof practice? I'm thinking we can do some practice. And then I want to go into our last e-exam and look at some of those exercises together. Okay. So as a reminder, you'll want to have your rules available. You saw before I moved over, or before I brought to the front the quantifier rules, that I had the truth functional rules up. And so that is another rule sheet that you want to have with you. Okay, so I've got some arguments entered into Fitch, and I want to start by having us remind ourselves about our strategies, right? So when the conclusion is an existential, you are most likely going to use existential elimination to achieve it. Now, lots of times when we think about our conclusion being an existential, we think about generating an existential, which is to say we think about a generalization, not an elimination. But that the generalization to the existential, if that's the way that we go, is going to happen within the existential elim subproof. In addition, a way that you can think about using existential elimination as you're structuring subproof is when you see the existential in your premises. Now we want to talk a little bit more about why we must use a name that is not already in use when we set up existential elimination. We've said that that's the case, but we need to talk more about why. And the little bit that we've said about why just has to do with wanting to avoid being able to achieve the conclusion of an invalid argument when we do violate that restriction. So more on that in a little bit. Yes, there is not a name already in use in this argument, but there would be if we were to first eliminate the universal, right? So when in your premises you see a combination of universally and existentially quantified sentences, you're going to want to say, if I'm going to eliminate the existential, I better do that first, right? So a good rule of thumb is just go ahead and set up existential elim, grab a name, right? Remember our hypothetical name. And then, sorry about any background noise. I think I've told you before that there's conveniently a construction going on across the street from my house. And so there's lots of noise being generated. Anyway, so we assume, so we say, well, this existential claim can be eliminated by way of assuming that the A that's not a C is named A, right? And then we continue on our way to say that the goal of this existential claim is, in fact, the conclusion of the argument, so that we can exit out and say we've just concluded by way of eliminating the existential at line 2 and then the subproof that follows starting at line 3, that in fact something is an A and a B, right? And remember our general practice of when we're first setting up our roadmap, our structuring subproof, right, our blueprint subproof, that we tell ourselves what we're doing. We tell our future selves what we will have done. We tell our future selves that now, so that if we forget, by the time we do get to what is now line 7, we will be reminded. Now, if we keep working backward, we want to say that line 6 is going to be the generalization of this conjunction claim, right? So remember, we want to keep working backward. So we generalize to the existential, right? If A is both an A and a B, then it follows that something is both an A and a B. And then we want to say that line 5, now we're into our truth functional rules. Line 5 is going to be the conjunction of what is now. So what is now line 5 is going to be the conjunction of what is now line 6 is going to be the conjunction of what is now lines 4 and 5. And so now I think we're in a pretty good position to ask ourselves how it is that we get lines 4 and lines 5. Now, line 4 should be pretty straightforward, right? We're eliminating line 4 from line 3 by way of the rule conjunction elimination, right? But then the question is, well, line 3 doesn't have anything to do with line 5. How the heck am I going to get line 5? And now we're in a position to go up to line 1 and ask ourselves, is it time to peel off that quantifier and instantiate the variable to our hypothetical name? And the answer to that is, yep, seems like a good time. So you could, if you want, start the thing after line 4, but let's just go ahead and start it at line 3, because remember, we're working backward. So it makes sense to do this, to eliminate line 1 at line 4. And before we move on, just a show of hands or a verbal or some indication that you're good so far or you're not. So thumbs up, thumbs down, questions, problems, confusions.
Yeah, that's good. Got it.
Yay, yay. I see a couple thumbs up, and thanks to Reggie for a verbal. Lewis. Okay. Please don't be shy. And thanks, Mike. If there's any confusion, I want to know, right?
Do we have to create another subproof for line 1 inside?
So Dereje, you're anticipating the disjunction elimination subproof that we will generate. So first, does it make sense that from line 1 we've pulled off the quantifier and we've instantiated our variable?
Yeah, but
Okay.
I was expecting to actually have another subproof in there to actually generate that, which is line 4.
Oh, okay. So let's do this. Let's look at lines 1 and lines 4. And let's go ahead. I'm circling with my cursor the universal elim rule, right? We know that if all the blah, 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 we know that from line 1, if all of or every A is a B or a C, then that means that if the name A is an A, then it is a B or a C. Right, so there's no restriction on the elimination of the universal quantifier.
Okay.
So no subproof is required. So think about your universal elim and your existential intro as tactical moves in the same way that we talked about, for example, let me just go ahead and, in the same way that we talked about conjunction elim, disjunction intro, negation elim, contradiction elim, conditional elim, biconditional elim as tactical moves as well, which is to say,
yeah,
they're
don't have subproofs.
Beautiful. Yeah, good for you.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Of course, of course. All right, so now what's everybody thinking about the move now, right? So look at 4 and 5. Right? Is it clear that we've been in this process of dismantling, right? So think about, so I'm at line 6, but I'm going to just grab I'm going to take my slider up to lines 1 and 2. So just a moment ago, we dismantled line 1 by way of the elimination of the quantifier and the instantiation of the variable to the hypothetical name. That hypothetical name occurs at the assumptive step at line 3, where we've dismantled, or we've begun, if you will, the dismantling project that involves assuming a name for the existential at line 2, right? And then when we were originally setting this thing up, we said, okay, this is our goal. So our goal at the subproof is the goal of the argument or the conclusion, the termination, the full termination point. And from line, in order to achieve line 9, we said that we needed the generalization from what is now line 8. And we needed to generate the conjunction at line 8 from what is now lines 5 and 7, right? So now, and we're still dismantling, right? How did we get line 6?
From line 4 and 5.
Beautiful, yeah. From line 4 and 5, conditional elim, right? And we're double checking it over here with our pop-up rule. And by the way, what we can also do here is check as we go. So what did I do? Oh, what's not well? Oh, I see what I did. So good news, when I checked my step and I got the red X, I then dropped my eyeballs down to the bar here, the very bottom of the Fitch window, and I'm told that at least one of the support formulas is not well formed. And then I said, what did I do? Oh, I see. I need another paren. Right? Yay. 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 Okay. Check. Check. All right. So now let's go back in. So line 7 was the last step that from which we worked backward in terms of conjoining it with line 5 to get what is now line 8. So, but notice that right before that, now we've derived line 6, and line 6 as a disjunction, right, says, hey, you gotta eliminate me, as it were. I'm going to go ahead and make the font smaller. Sorry that the window flipped. I don't know why, but when I have Fitch open and I make some sort of formatting change for some reason, the window that we're in like disappears and another one gets brought to the front. Anyway, so here we are at line 6. We're going to assume B. And remember, if it's the case that we want line 8, right, what is now line 8, then that should be the goal of each one of our disjunction elim subproofs. Right, so let me go ahead and say that right now, so I don't forget when I finally am at the relevant line, that I'm setting up disjunction elim, right? And now what I need to do is fill in the nested subproof sequence. So line 8 should be, I hope, straightforward as a reiteration. Now, one item that we didn't talk about, but that I hope was lurking somewhere in your thinking, the fact that there's a negation of C at line 2, right? And C, the affirmed sentence, occurs in line 1. So the question is, how do I get my A is B sentence? Well, I'm going to generate a contradiction that I can then eliminate. Right? So I hope that what I'm doing here is a nice warm-up for you. And what I mean by a nice warm-up is basically this, that if you haven't been thinking about this stuff, although why wouldn't you, but if you haven't been thinking about this stuff in the past few days, hold on, I'm sure the window's going to flip again. Or let's try it this way. Hold on. Oh, good, it stayed. All right. So if you haven't been thinking about this stuff in the past couple of days, although I imagine you were because you love it, that the work we're doing right now kind of gets you back into the groove. And that you say, yeah, I not only know what my strategy is, right? I not only know what my strategy is, but I know how to, once I've set up that strategy, keep working backward as I'm mindful of what my premises say so that I can generate the conclusion. So if I were to ask you on a scale of 1 to 10 what your confidence level is, how many are feeling 10? Anybody feeling 10?
Yes.
Yay! Awesome. Okay. Can I trouble you? Why is this not? Sorry, guys. I was trying to be clever and make the font. Here, I'll just do this. Hold on. Okay. Duh, should have done that sooner. So, Deb, can I pick on you because you were kind enough to say, yeah, I'm feeling a confidence level of 10. Can you talk a little bit, and don't feel pressured if you're not comfortable doing it. Just say, nah, I'd rather not. But if you are comfortable talking about how your mind is working, how you thought through this proof, right? Because the way I talk about it is not the only way for you to articulate the sequences.
What do you mean? Can you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, so when you when you first saw this, and I'm yapping away, talking, were you thinking, yes, my first thought is to go to my strategies? Or did you say, my first thought is looking at the quantifiers and thinking about how to eliminate them? Or like, how did you start thinking about this proof?
Well, you usually whenever you showed us a proof that had the conclusion that was an existential, you always said work from the back because there's really only two options.
Okay, good.
So you kind of narrow it down from there, and since it already has an existential on line 2, you could start with that to get your next step. Sometimes when there's like the universal and the existential, it's kind of, I'm not really sure which of the two to start with. But it's easier to prove it with the existential because there's just one case, right?
Oh, I see what you're thinking. Yeah, well, you could say there's at least one case. There may be more. Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you do universal, it's harder because you have to prove it for all things. So that's why if I had the choice between the two, I would do the existential first.
So question for you, given what you just said about the universal, I'm thinking that and this goes back to something Dereje said earlier, you're actually thinking about universal intro, which I'm currently circling with my cursor, right? When you're given a universal, your plan, your thinking is going to be, I eliminate it, right? Which it does not involve a subproof.
Correct.
Okay, good. All right, so now let's do this. Let's suppose that we decided rather than start with the existential, because you used the word can, which suggests that the move that you could have made first would be this, which is the elimination of the
universe.
Right.
Yeah.
Oops, hold on. But now let's take a look at what happens when we try to do that. So show proof toolbar, is that? Yeah, okay. All right, so
but usually when you do the universal, don't you do like the counter to that to prove it?
Hold on just one second, because I'm not quite sure I follow, but does here, I'm just going to get rid of the goal for right now. Does everybody see that everything checks out except, right, the last line, which is the conclusion of the derivation. It's the goal. And Fitch is telling us a name has been introduced as new, which was already in use. Now, if you were to go back into line 4 and pick a new name, the difficulty would be that you then would not be in a position, for example, to, right, eliminate the consequent from line 3 because you have two different sentences in the antecedent and then the supposed affirmation. Okay, so what you want to think about, and then Deb, I'd like you to reiterate what you said just a moment ago, but what I'd like you to think about is the fact that when you are setting up an existential elim, you've got to use a name that's not already in use, such that if the only other elimination that you'll be making is a universal, the universal elim comes after. There's no restriction on the universal elim. Okay, Deb, forgive me. Would you reiterate what you said?
I was just wondering, usually when we need to prove something with the universal, don't we do the counter argument to prove that it's false? And then,
So are you asking you're talking about when we want to generate a universal claim?
right, don't you usually do like it's false and then say the,
So not no. I mean, I don't know what the statistics on that are, and I don't mean to be snotty when I say that. I don't know that I don't think I have a very good answer to you in terms of the "don't you usually" question. What I can say is this: when you generate a universal, you are required to use the subproof in this version of the system so that you don't make what we would call a hasty generalization, right? So, for example, if we think about um, uh, just our group, right? So we've got, I don't know, a dozen or so people in our room, and if I say, so right now I know I'm wearing glasses, and if I infer from the fact that I'm wearing glasses, Mia's wearing glasses, so everyone is, right? All we need to do is find one counter example, one exception to show that my inference is erroneous, right? So if you guys were to all put on turn your cameras on, and there was even one of you not wearing a pair of glasses, my inference is thereby invalidated, right? So I think what you're asking is, what do I do if I want to demonstrate non-consequence? On the other hand, if you're looking to generate a contradiction so that you can then draw an inference from that contradiction, that would depend on other factors in the argument. Is that making sense? Am I addressing your question at all?
yeah,
Yeah?
yeah. You have to prove it in like a subproof and then, yeah, okay.
Yeah, right. So
in this case, it doesn't matter because it's an existential that you're trying to get, not a universal.
Exactly. Yeah. If it was a universal, we would need to generate another subproof, and
Correct.
in that case, again, depending on what your ultimate conclusion is. So, is your ultimate conclusion a universal? Is your ultimate conclusion as an existential? If you have, one of them is going to be nested depending on what you're trying to achieve.
Correct.
Yeah. All right, so let's keep this up, and then let's see, what else do we have? Where are you not opening? Okay, so so we just talked about, and let me make the font a little bit bigger. Right. We just talked about the restriction on the universal intro, right? So when we want to introduce a universal, we use the hypothetical name, the randomly chosen name, the arbitrary name, and it's something like, yes, it's a name, but it's something like a variable, right? Because it's just a name that we grab. One way that you could think about the assumed name, the hypothetical name, is to think in terms of what, for example, statisticians do when they want to generate, they're doing a poll, let's say, of, the mood, right? So, how are people in this country feeling about our current economic condition, or the way that state and federal governments are handling the COVID-19 pandemic, right? It's not the case that they poll every single person, right? That's just not realistic. So they have, and I don't pretend to be proficient with how they've generated this algorithm, but formula, but they pick, set aside the representative, right, sample. Think about random sampling, right? They grab just anybody, and then again, assuming that the anybody that they've grabbed is representative of the population they want to draw an inference about, that randomly chosen name is a stand-in, right? And so, it always floors me that, and I don't know if I'm right about this number, but supposedly if you're doing a poll about everybody's sort of the general mood of the country, with plus or minus for error, a certain number of percentage points, you only need like 1,800 people, right? That just always floors me. Okay, so the universal intro, I hope, makes sense in terms of the restriction on the randomly chosen name, the hypothetical name, the name that's not already in use. And then we can just sort of assume that when we're talking about a randomly chosen name, it's representative of the population that we're talking about, right? But one question that may be a little bit harder to see the answer to is the existential elim. So let's take the following argument. I think that you guys are probably quite comfortable with the fact that this argument is invalid, right? It is true that some animals are dogs, right? There's at least one animal that's a dog. It is true that some animals are cats. At least one animal is a cat. But the conclusion, some dogs are cats, that's false, right? So, but here's the thing. If we misuse existential elimination, we can actually prove the conclusion of this argument. And so but we shouldn't be able to, right? So let's try this. Oh, I keep doing that. Right, so if we say, wrong order from the original English. If we say there is something, it's an animal, and it's a dog, and then we say there is something, it's an animal, and it's a cat, and we conclude, I keep forgetting my paren, sorry. And then we have our conclusion, so some thing that's a dog is also a cat, right? It should be the case that when we ask whether or not the thing is valid, right, we were told, nope, the animal isn't valid, so-called. But what if we go ahead and say the animal A is a dog, and then I'm going to do the same thing again. The animal A is a cat, and then I go ahead and eliminate my dog, eliminate my cat, bring my dog, not my gog, my dog, and my cat, right, together, and then I generalize my dog, cat, and I exit. To assert my dog and cat, and then I exit again. Right? So obviously if we if we go ahead and work each one of these inferences, right, we'll get check marks all the way until we get to our last step. So, but does it make sense to say that when we use the same name, we're able to work our standard rules and end up where we want to go? But we shouldn't be able to end up where we want to go precisely because the argument is invalid. On the other hand, if we use our rules precisely, which is to say, we do not use a name already in use, then we're going to find out that there's no way for us to make the move from A is a dog and B is a cat to something is a dog cat, because when we generalize, that is, introduce the existential, right, that existential ranges over the entire sentence. So the two names would technically have to be different variables, which would, well, so I'm fudging a little bit here, but then that would suggest that we'd need two different quantifiers, right? So in a nutshell then, we say, okay, we get that we don't use a name that's not already in use, because if we did do that, then we'd be able to get to the conclusion of an invalid argument. You know, and if we're just working pencil paper and we make this error, we won't know because we don't have Fitch there to tell us, hey, you've misapplied the rule. Okay, so I hope that helps a little bit. Remember, for some of us, understanding the rules and their application is the way to get at ultimately the mechanics, if you will. And for some of us, just getting the mechanics is all that we need to then make the application work. And then eventually we say, oh yeah, and I get it too. Okay, so I'm going to close this window. All right, so here we are with another argument where the conclusion is an existential. And what we're going to want to do is think about our strategy, as well as think about, if I get my parens, as well as think about the sub-strategies as we need them. So the first sentence reads as follows. So now, I'm just going to go ahead and read through the argument, and then we'll talk about the strategy. The first sentence says, every cube is large. The second sentence says, none of the large things are tets. Or we can read it as follows, for every x, if x is large, then it's not a tet. And then the third sentence reads, something is a tet. Now, you're probably thinking, hey, if I can get lines 2 and 3 in the shape that I want them, I can generate a contradiction, right? Remember, we love contradictions. And if I can generate a contradiction, then that means that I can finally conclude, before I exit out of my subproof, that there is something that's not a cube. Now, one piece of advice is this: when you're working on textbook exercises that involve the blocks language, it's not a bad idea for those of us who like to see a world play out. It's a good idea for us to open up Tarski's world and maybe build the world in question, right? And and this goes back, Deb, to your point about trying to falsify a claim. If we try to make the premises, if we try to make the conclusion false while we maintain true premises, but the argument is valid, then we can see step by step how that's not possible to do. Then we can import that thinking back into Fitch. Okay, so our go-to thinking is this. When we have an existential in our conclusion, 99.9% of the time, especially when we see that we have an existential in our premises, is set up existential elimination. And remember how we start these. right? We're going to work our, we're going to set up our strategy, and we're going to tell ourselves what that strategy is in advance, so that right now we're saying, hey, future me, I don't want to forget what I had in mind at the outset, so I'm going to go ahead and say it now. All right. Now, line 7 is our goal. How did we get line 7? Presumably, we generalized from what is now line 6. And then when we see line 6, we should say, oh, how would I get a negation? Well, I'd get a negation this way. I'd assume that A is a cube, and I generate a contradiction so I can get out and introduce a negation. And remember, as you're working backward, you know, you're slowly, effectively backfilling, right? And then you say, okay, well, if line 7, what is now my contradiction, is going to get me out of that subproof, how do I generate a contradiction? Well, take a look at line 2, and you say, oh, I see how I can get that. I'm going to get I'm going to generate a contradiction between the two sentences that are truth functionally contradictory. How am I going to get tet, not tet A? Well, if I have large A, and I'm just going to follow the order, if you will, of the conditional elim rule. If I have large A, which is an affirmation of the sentence, if A is large, then A is not a tet, then I get, by conditional elim, line 8. And then I have to ask myself, well, how did I get A is large? Well, take a look at line 1. Line 1 has, on the right side of this arrow, the entity large sentence. So at this point I might say, okay, I think I'm going to go ahead now and start eliminating my universals so that I can work my truth functional rules. And let me go ahead and make the font smaller. Okay. All right, so line 6 from line 1, line 7 from line 2, line 8 from lines 5 and 6, I'm done. Thoughts about working backward. Does it make sense to say working backward allows you to see what you're going to have to do in order to get what you're saying that you have? And of course, what you're saying you have is what you need to get some further sentence that you say you have. How are we doing? Bunch of thumbs up? Any thumbs down?
It's better to start from the bottom and go to the top.
Yeah, I mean, so remember that one of the ways we've talked about this strategic thinking is in terms of something like the following. If I know I want to be at thus and such a location, at thus and such a time, on thus and such a day, then what do I need to do to get there, right? What's going to guarantee that I get there is another way to put it, right? So what are the sufficient conditions, you know, so that, or you can think about it. So think about what you do when you want to explain an existing condition, right? So here's what is the case. What guaranteed that? What sorts of things transpired in order to bring this about? And that's another way to think about what we're doing here. Now, some of you I recognize are more comfortable with working forward, and that's fine too. But at some point, you're going to realize that for the working forward to go the way you want it to, you will need to think about what your goal is, and that guides you, right? So ultimately, you are working from that conclusion. Just like when you know, if you're at the start line of a marathon, of a race, you need the finish line to know what your goal is, so that helps guide you to it. All right, so hold on just a sec. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and cut out of this. Okay, so here is another exercise where we've got a couple of different quantifiers. And just for the sake of the idea of working forward, let's do this. What if we say, okay, I know that I need to peel off, that is, instantiate quantifiers. So let's start with line 1. I get the following. And then I do the same to line 2. And I'll just work them in order so that even though you could instantiate them both at the same time. And I'm just going to go ahead and pick different constants. I, in principle, could use the same constant as I did at line 4 in line 5. But, you know, we're talking about some relation, and I'm going to just go ahead and assume that we've got 2 different names. They could, in fact, be the same object. We don't know. Right? But now I recognize that I haven't dealt with, right, line 3. And in order for me to eliminate, we know this, if we know that when we look at the rules, if we want to eliminate an existential, right, that we're going to need to generate a subproof. And then that tells me, oh, hang on a second. If I'm going to generate a subproof, I'm going to need to use a name not already in use. I'm just going to go ahead and call it C. Not because I'm not going to go back in here and adjust this name, but for right now, remember I've said I can't use a name already in use, and I'm pretending as though this is already in use at line 6, B is already in use at line 6, even though it comes later, right, in the proof, so it's not already in use. But just to keep my thinking as unencumbered as possible by the restrictions. Right now, because the existential Y covers only Y and A is already in use, C is fine to use. Now I'm in a position to work lines 5 and 6, but they've got to be worked in the subproof in question, right? So I'm going to, just for the sake of time, I'm going to eliminate both of these quantifiers at once and instantiate both at once. Now, B is not already in use, so you could, if you want, go back in here if you felt like you wanted to use names in alphabetical order, right? And then what is it that you're going for, right? So at this point, you definitely want to realize that you're trying to get this existential, right? And you know you've got a negation. And when you look at lines 4 and 5, you realize that the consequent at line 5 is rejected at line 4, which yields a rejection of the antecedent. And our rule for proving that is the following. And then we're done. But given the way that we were working previously, where we said, no, we're going to just work backward, work backward, work backward, it seems to me like we have an easier time kind of filling things in than we do when we just work forward. If we just work forward, we don't always know what we're trying to achieve, and so it's hard to see how we're supposed to move. In addition, when we just work forward, at least in this case, we had to then backpedal a bit and delete some lines because we realized that we needed to set up an existential elimination sequence. What do we think? In addition, by the time we get to line 11, we realize that we see that we're done, but we think, wait, how did we start this? Right? So we didn't tell our future selves at the time what we were trying to achieve. Okay, so let's back up. We know that we want the existential 99% of the time. We know that this is going to be the generalization. Oh, sorry, it's going to be the generalization from an atomic, sorry, I said atomic, from a sentence with a name, right? And then we have to ask how we got that name. Or not, sorry, how we got that negation. Right? So negation intro, how did we get this contradiction? And so as we're working backward, right, we see what it is that we will have to achieve. Or sorry, I said what we'll have to achieve, what we need to do in order to achieve this contradiction, right? So backward working is our friend. An even more strategic backward working is, as we said before, the idea of letting that conclusion tell you what it is you're going to set up, right? So you're going to want to say existential, the existential claim in the conclusion tells me that I should set up existential intro, but then I notice that I don't have an existential on as the governing quantifier in line 1, so I will make that first move, which is to say I'll generate the existential as the governing quantifier by way of first eliminating the universal. And then I know when I generate the existential assumptive step, or sorry, the existential elimination subproof, I know that at the assumptive step I'm going to choose a new name. And then off I go. How are we doing? Oh, that's not what I want.
I have a quick question.
On this one?
The one previously, if in the conclusion the negation bx is not in any of your is not given to you, will you assume the negation bx, or will you assume bx and then prove the negation? Which one is simpler to do?
So Deb, are you asking this? So at line 4, are you saying that instead of starting with an assumed name, you'd start with something like BA, like I was just doing a moment ago as I was thinking about the working backward, generate a
do you do the counter to it and then, like, you know how it has the negation in front? Do you just do it without the negation? Do you use the proof by contradiction to show it?
Okay, I think I get what you're saying. So here's the question. If you were to set up a negation intro and then you generalize from what is now 7 to 8, right?
Sure.
The question is, how are you going to generate that contradiction? So you need to eliminate all these both of these quantifiers and offer a new name. And then you would need to find a way to generate a contradiction between 3 and whatever that and the sentence negation existential negation a y, right? Because this contradiction we think should be between negation a, the relational predicate a, and whatever this name is, right? But you're still going to have to eliminate this existential. If you don't eliminate the existential, you'd need to generate a different contradiction. Does that make sense?
I already see the contradiction in what's given to you for the A and the negation A. So I was wondering, when you do the subproof, do you do it as B of X or negation B of X? Because you want negation B of X, right?
Well, you need to eliminate the variable, right? So think of, well, here's the thing. So let's do this real quick. Oh, sorry, I pulled both animals off, right? So if I'm going to instantiate both of the quantifiers at line 2, I get something like this, right? And then I end up with, by way of conditional elim, I get sentence 6.
Correct.
And okay, I can generalize but it's not the case that these two are contradictories.
I can't apply the negation A of Y in the subproof, A of B in the subproof, citing line 3.
I don't, so you're asking why 3 and 7 are not contradictories. Is that true or no?
I was wondering if you could put, oh, okay. You'd have, never mind, I got it. Yeah,
right,
I understand.
Yeah, so
yeah.
If I, and forgive me if for not having, sorry, forgive me for not having followed your question correctly, if that's the case, and also for being convoluted earlier. If I do understand correctly, the short story is this: when you're asking, can I just go ahead and set up negation intro? The answer is yes, but not as you're structuring subproof, because you're not going to generate the contradiction you want.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Instead,
Yeah.
you need to eliminate the existential at line 3.
Yeah.
So when we were originally working backward here, saying, okay, in order for me to generate a negation in front of A is B, I set up negation intro. Yes, that is true, but that's going to happen within, so it's a nested subproof, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So then going back to our talk about the structuring subproof, once we've eliminated the universal at line 1, now we've got our existential. Now we're ready to set up where the existential is your goal. Oh, that was A, sorry. Right? And then that's existential elim. And here is where you're talking about generating the negation intro that you then generalize, and then you exit. So initially when we looked at this particular example, we were working forward to show kind of the difficulties with trying to just work forward. Here we're saying, no, we know that we are setting up we did have to do a little bit of forward working, but again, it was forward working with the goal in mind. So we set up our existential elim, check to make sure that we've got it right. And then once we get here to line 6, that's when we say, oh, I need to be able to use line 4 in combination with what will be the instantiation of the quantifiers at line 2 to introduce that negation. And then just as a reminder, we continue to work the same rules over and over again in different environments, but the ultimate environment is still closed, right? Because the system is self-contained. Okay, how about this one? What are we doing? Tell me what to set up. Come on. What's our go-to when you're looking at the conclusion and the premises? Tell me, telepathy won't work. Please.
You start with eliminating the existential line 3.
Sweet. Thanks, Tereje. Excellent. So, right, so we're eliminating, and what we want at the end is existential, not tet or medium, so that we can get out and say, I don't think this will copy for me, but I'm going to try it. Nope. So we can get out and say existential, not something is not a tet or its medium. And as Dereje says, we're setting up existential elim. Okay, I'm missing a paren. And what did I do? the conclusions. Oh, that's because I'm also missing a paren in here too. Try it again. What did I do? What did I do? Oh, good one, Mia. Okay, finally. All right, now presumably we're generalizing from 7 to 8, which means that we've got either A is not a tet or it's medium. And now the question is, how do we get this disjunction? Well, if we have not tet A, we can introduce the disjunction. If we have A is medium, we can introduce the disjunction. Let's go ahead and look up to our premises and ask what's going to be the most efficient way to go. Well, we can dismantle the conditional once we instantiate the universal at line 1. We can dismantle the conditional, right, once we instantiate the universal at line 2. And then notice at line 4, we've got a disjunction. And it seems reasonable to say that we're going to want to set up disjunction elimination where the goal is either A is not a tet or it's medium. And don't forget, we're telling our future selves now that we've set up disjunction elim. We're here in the second subproof. Let's just keep working backward. How are we going to get what we want? Well, take a look at line 2. An elimination of the universal. Oops. Take a look at 8 and 9. We have the elimination of the conditional. Remember, we're dismantling, assembling. Once we have A as medium, it follows that A is not a tet or it's medium. Remember, we use every premise that's given or derived, so that means we need to work line 1. And we're doing the same thing, right? And what I mean by that is we're working the same rules in parallel to the rules we used in the subproof beginning at line 9. Oops. Thoughts? So here's a question for you guys. Did you anticipate any of the moves that I made? And if you did anticipate the moves, you know, make note to yourself of what those were. In addition, if there was a move made that you did not anticipate, but that you said, ah, yes, I see it, ask yourself, did you not anticipate it because you were thinking something else, there was a bit of confusion, or I was just going too fast? And depending on what the answer is to that question, you know, make a special note to self about what you're going to do. So if it was just a matter of me going faster than you were ready for, that's all you need to do is just keep chugging away at your practice. If it's because you were confused about what to do, then make a note to self to ask, okay, so why was I confused about what to do? What happened at that line? So, for example, for me, there are some rules that historically tend to be ones they don't resonate with me. I don't connect with them. And so I have like this weird aversion to the rule. And then I have to realize, well, I gotta love the rule, or even if I don't love the rule, I've got to accept it because I'm going to be using it.